All right. What are you two doing out here, and what's in the bag?
Sitting in a park, man.
Yeah,
We're not bothering anybody.
Yeah, well, I asked what's in the bag. Go ahead and tell me.
That's not your business.
It is. That's not your business.
Hand it over right now, or you're under arrest.
There is a particular kind of arrogance that mistakes a badge for a blank check. Officer Rod Rowell had it. He'd had it since his first week on the force, the certainty that his authority was total, his instincts unquestionable, his judgment beyond review. In 8 months, 3 complaints had been filed against him. 3 times, his department looked the other way. So on a Thursday afternoon in late April, when he spotted 2 black men sitting calmly on a bench in Riverside Park, he did what he always did. He watched. He decided. He moved. What he could not have anticipated was that the men waiting on that bench were not what he assumed. That they had been trained to remain calm under exactly this kind of pressure. That the bag he was so desperate to open held the thread of a federal investigation he was about to unravel. And that the moment he opened his mouth, the clock on his career had already begun counting down. Before this story goes any further, drop your city or country in the comments right now. We read every single one, and we love knowing where this community is watching from. And if you believe 2 men should be able to sit on a park bench in peace, without a badge and a bias deciding their guilt for them, hit that like button and subscribe. Every like, every comment, every share tells us you stand on the right side of this story. Now let's get into it. Riverside Park on a Thursday afternoon in late April was exactly what a public park was supposed to be. Children moved in loose, laughing packs near the playground at the park's southern edge, their noise carrying across the grass and waves. A pair of joggers circled the outer path at a steady rhythm, earbuds in, faces forward. An older man sat on a bench near the fountain with a newspaper folded across his knee, reading in the unhurried way of someone with nowhere else to be. Pigeons congregated near the path's center, unbothered. A light breeze moved through the trees and set the new spring leaves trembling against the pale blue sky. It was, by every observable measure, an ordinary afternoon. Officer Rod Rowell did not see any of it. His attention had narrowed to a single point, a wooden bench near the park's eastern walkway, partially shaded by a cluster of oaks, where 2 men sat in conversation. They were dressed casually, dark jeans, hoodies, the kind of unremarkable clothing that made them indistinguishable from anyone else in the park. One checked his phone. The other leaned back, arms resting along the back of the bench, scanning the path ahead of him with the relaxed attention of a man waiting for something he was not in a hurry about. To every person in that park, they were invisible. Background figures in an ordinary afternoon. To Rowell, they were a problem waiting to be confirmed. He had been parked at the curb along the park's eastern boundary for 15 minutes, engine idling, one hand resting on the wheel and his eyes fixed on the bench. He had not been dispatched. There was no call, no complaint, no reported incident of any kind. He had simply seen the men, made a decision in the first 3 seconds and stayed. Watching. Building a case in his head that the scene itself refused to provide. Rod Rowell was 26 years old. He had been on the force for 8 months. In that time, he had made 11 arrests. 3 of them had resulted in charges that were eventually dropped. 2 had led to formal complaints, one from a black man detained outside a hardware store for carrying tools he had just purchased, and another from a Latino woman stopped and questioned outside her own apartment building because, in Rowell's report, she had been loitering. A 3rd complaint had been filed just 6 weeks prior by a black teenager who said Rowell had stopped him on a bicycle and demanded identification without cause. All 3 complaints had been reviewed. All 3 had been dismissed. His supervisors described him in evaluations as eager, proactive, committed. Nobody used the word reckless. Nobody used the word bias. Those words had been implied and then carefully set aside. Rowell had learned, through those 8 months, that the system around him had a high tolerance for what he was. That his instincts, the ones that fired whenever he saw a black or brown face in a space he had decided didn't belong to them, would not be seriously examined unless something went badly wrong. And so far, nothing had. The complaints had dissolved. The arrests had moved through the system. His supervisors had signed off. He had no reason to believe this afternoon would be any different. The two men on the bench were Robert Watson and Kevin Volker. Watson was 38, a 12-year veteran of the FBI's Organized Crime Division, methodical by training and instinct, a man who had spent more time in the field than behind a desk and showed it in the way he moved, unhurried, deliberate, always aware of the space around him. Volker was 34, 6 years in the Bureau, and had the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was a tool. Together, they had been embedded in a 6-month operation targeting a mid-level criminal network moving stolen financial data through a web of front businesses across 4 states. They were waiting for a contact. At 12 minutes past 2, he arrived, a third man, compact, moving with the quick efficiency of someone who did not intend to be memorable. He reached the bench, made no greeting, set a small black duffel bag on the seat beside Watson, and kept walking without breaking stride. 15 seconds start to finish. The kind of handoff that was designed to look like nothing at all. It looked like everything to Raoul. He put the car in park and got out. The walk across the grass took less than 30 seconds. Raoul moved with the particular kind of deliberateness that is less about confidence than performance. Chin level, hand near his belt, posture arranged to signal authority before a single word was spoken. Around him, the park continued its ordinary afternoon. A child ran past chasing a ball. 2 women walked the path with strollers side by side. The joggers completed another loop. None of them looked at him. He stopped at the bench and looked down at the 2 men the way men look at things they have already decided belong to them, with ownership, not inquiry. Watson looked up without urgency. Volker's expression did not change at all. Raoul demanded to know what they were doing there. The question was not a question. It was an accusation shaped like one. Watson replied with the calm of a man who had been in far more dangerous rooms than this. He told Raoul they were sitting in the park, nothing more, nothing less. The answer was simple because the answer was complete. Raoul's eyes moved to the duffel bag. He demanded to know what was inside it. Volker replied evenly that the bag's contents were none of Raoul's business. The words landed and Raoul felt them the way men like him always feel refusal, as insubordination, as threat, as confirmation of everything he had already decided. His posture shifted. His voice dropped into that register that is not quite a shout but carries a shout's intention. He told them they were behaving suspiciously. He told them the bag needed to be opened. He told them that their refusal to comply was itself a problem, as if the right to decline a warrantless search were a form of resistance rather than a constitutional protection. Watson's expression remained unchanged. Volker said nothing. Raoul's hand moved to his belt. His fingers found the taser. He pulled it free with the practiced ease of a man who had decided the conversation was over, and he held it where both men could see it clearly, not quite aimed, but not quite lowered either. In his other hand, handcuffs appeared with a metallic click. He told them this was their last chance. Either the bag was surrendered, or both of them were going to jail. On the bench, without looking at each other, Watson and Volker arrived at the same understanding simultaneously. It was visible only in the faint settling of Volker's shoulders and the way Watson's right hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the inside of his jacket. The park continued around them. Children played. Joggers ran. The old man near the fountain turned a page. And the recording device, tucked into the lining of Watson's jacket, caught every word. Raoul did not lower the taser. He stood over the bench with the particular rigidity of a man who had committed to a position and found, somewhere in the locked machinery of his certainty, that backing down was no longer a language he could speak. The taser remained visible. The cuffs remained in his other hand. His voice had taken on the flat, pressurized tone of someone who had stopped performing authority and started demanding it. He told them again that the bag needed to be surrendered. He told them that their refusal was obstruction. He reached, with a confidence that no evidence supported, for the explanation he had carried across the grass with him before the conversation had even begun, that men who looked like them, in a park like this, doing what they were doing, did not deserve the benefit of the doubt. He said, plainly and without hesitation, that he knew their kind was always up to no good. That it didn't matter what they said. That as far as he was concerned, the color of their skin was reason enough. Watson and Volker did not move. That stillness, measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of people who understood exactly what was happening, seemed to agitate Rowell further. He had encountered defiance before, but it had always been nervous, reactive, searching for an exit. This was different. These men looked at him the way people look at a problem they have already solved. Watson spoke then, not in panic but in warning. He told Rowell calmly that he was making a serious mistake, and that there would be consequences for what he was doing. Volker added, with the same measured composure, that Rowell would want to ask himself whether the color of their skin was the only thing driving his decision, because that was exactly what it looked like from where they were sitting. Rowell dismissed it. He told them their rights did not supersede his authority in the field. He escalated through the Fourth Amendment the way someone drives through a stop sign, aware of it, and indifferent. He announced that he would be placing them both under arrest for resisting an officer, that the bag would be seized as evidence, and that anything they said would be used accordingly. Volker's fingers, steady and unhurried, made a small adjustment near the collar of his hoodie. The motion was invisible in context, a man shifting slightly on a bench, but it completed a circuit. The recording device was now capturing at full sensitivity. Every syllable Rowell produced from that moment forward was being catalogued with the precision of a federal evidence standard. Rowell reached for Watson's wrist. Watson reached for his badge. The credential emerged from inside his jacket, not dramatically, not with haste, but with the quiet finality of something that had been waiting for the right moment. It was followed immediately by Volker's. 2 federal badges, held at eye level, steady in the afternoon light. Rowell's hand stopped moving. The taser did not drop immediately. There was a pause, 3-4 seconds, in which the full weight of what he had done arranged itself in the air between them. His face underwent a series of small, rapid adjustments, confusion first, then recognition, then something that resembled the beginning of fear working its way through a structure that had not been built to contain it. Watson identified them both. He told Rowell, with the measured calm of someone professionally trained not to raise his voice, that they were Special Agent Robert Watson and Special Agent Kevin Volker of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, currently engaged in an active organized crime investigation. He instructed Rowell to lower the taser. It went down. Volker told him about the recording. He did not deliver the information as a threat. He delivered it the way a physician delivers a diagnosis, factually, without embellishment, leaving the patient to absorb the implications at whatever pace they could manage. He told Rowell that every remark he had made, including every word that had touched on their race, their presence, and their presumed guilt, had been captured. Time-stamped. Already part of a federal record. Rowell began to speak. Whatever he intended to say, explanation, justification, apology, it didn't form into anything coherent. The sentences started and stopped. His posture, which had been so carefully assembled on the walk across the grass, had come apart. Watson told him what was in the bag. Not in detail, the operation's security precluded that, but enough. He explained that it contained intelligence materials and a communication device central to a federal investigation that had been 6 months in construction, involving the coordinated effort of multiple agencies. He told Rowell plainly that had he succeeded in seizing the bag, the consequences would have extended far beyond a single afternoon in a park. Networks would have been alerted, assets compromised, and the work of dozens of federal agents across 4 states could have unraveled from a single impulsive decision made by a man who had never once stopped to consider that he might be wrong. Watson then told Rowell, without raising his voice and without ceremony, to leave. He left. They watched him cross the grass in the opposite direction, the same deliberate walk, the same set of the shoulders, but hollowed out now, the performance without the conviction. He got into his patrol car. The engine turned over. He pulled away from the curb and did not look back. Watson and Volker sat for a moment in the ordinary afternoon. Children played at the far end of the park. The old man near the fountain was still reading. The joggers had finished their loop and gone. Have you ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling in a public space? Drop a comment below, type, yes, if this story resonates with you, or tell us what reforms you think are needed to prevent moments like this one from happening again. And if you believe accountability should be the standard, not the exception, share this story. Every share matters. Watson pulled out his phone and called Supervisory Special Agent Harding. The call was brief. Watson covered the incident in the compressed, precise language of someone filing a field report: timeline, officer identification, the nature of the interference, the status of the operation. Harding listened without interrupting. When Watson finished, there was a pause that carried more weight than words. Harding told him he would make the necessary calls. He confirmed that the operation was to continue as planned. He told them to come in. The call ended. The duffel bag sat between them on the bench, undisturbed. Volker looked at the empty curb where Rowell's patrol car had been parked. Watson's jaw was set in the particular way it settled when something was unfinished, not tense, exactly, but present, the way a man looks when he has not yet decided what to do with what he is feeling. There was more to that afternoon than either of them had said aloud. Watson knew it. The recording had captured Rowell's words in clinical detail, but it had not captured the particular quality of being on the receiving end of them. The specific weight of being told, by a man with a badge and a taser, that your skin was the evidence against you. Watson had carried that weight before. He would carry it again. For now, he stood, adjusted the strap of the duffel bag over his shoulder, and nodded once. They walked out of the park the way they had arrived, without urgency, without drama, two men on an ordinary afternoon. Behind them, the park continued its ordinary life. The field office conference room was deliberately unremarkable: a long table, chairs, a flat screen mounted on the wall, the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everything look equally factual. Supervisory Special Agent Harding stood at one end of the table and listened to the recording without moving. He was a careful man. 15 years in federal law enforcement had built in him the habit of separating what he felt from what he needed to do next, and he exercised that habit now, his face neutral, his hands flat on the table, as Rowell's voice filled the room for the second time that day. The recording was 53 seconds of a man dismantling his own career one sentence at a time. The explicit remarks about race. The dismissal of constitutional rights. The threat of force against two federal agents. It was not ambiguous. It did not require interpretation. It was the kind of evidence that made lawyers stop arguing and start calculating. When it ended, Harding was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened, reached for his phone, and called the police chief's office directly. He did not go through department liaisons or interagency email chains. He called the chief, identified himself, and told him with the flat precision of someone who expected to be taken seriously that he had a recording of one of his officers threatening two FBI agents with a taser while making racially explicit statements, and that formal complaints would be filed before the end of the business day. The chief's office called back in 20 minutes. The internal affairs process that followed moved faster than internal affairs processes usually do. The recording had a way of accelerating bureaucracy, not because the department was eager, but because the alternative to moving quickly was the possibility of being seen to have not moved at all. Rowell was placed on administrative leave pending investigation within 48 hours of the incident. What the investigation found extended past Rowell. His personnel file was the starting point, and it was a document that told a story of warnings ignored and patterns unaddressed. The 3 dismissed complaints. The arrests without probable cause. The supervisor evaluations that described him as proactive in language that had served, functionally, as insulation. But once investigators began pulling adjacent files, cross-referencing complaint records, stop logs, use of force reports, they found the edges of something larger. 5 other officers in the same precinct carried complaint histories with a similar shape, stops concentrated in Black and Latino neighborhoods, complaints filed by residents who had described encounters almost identical to what Watson and Volker had experienced on the bench. Filed. Reviewed. Dismissed. The department had not seen a pattern because it had not looked for one. The recording changed that calculus. It was Watson who sat with the weight of it most visibly, in the quiet moments between the formal processes. He had said nothing in the debrief that he hadn't needed to say. He had been precise, professional, useful. But alone, in the evenings that followed, his mind returned to a different afternoon, not in a park, but on a sidewalk, outside a grocery store, 7 years before he had carried a badge of his own. He had been 24. Dressed in a collared shirt and khakis, carrying a paper bag of groceries, keys in hand, walking toward his car. An officer had stopped him. The stop had lasted 11 minutes. There was no probable cause. The officer had used language that did not appear in the report that was later filed. Watson had filed a complaint, formal, documented, specific. He had written down the officer's badge number. He had included the names of 2 witnesses. The complaint had been reviewed. It had been dismissed. He had not forgotten the dismissal. It had not made him bitter so much as clear about how the system handled these moments when they involved ordinary civilians, clear about what it would take to change the outcome, clear about why the work he was now doing mattered in a way that was personal as well as professional. He had not joined the Bureau as an act of revenge. He had joined it as an act of method. The only way to fight a system that ignored certain voices was to become a voice it could not ignore. Standing in the park on Thursday afternoon, he had understood, in the seconds before the badge came out, that the circle had not closed so much as arrived at a parallel point. The same assumptions. The same dismissal of rights. The same certainty of guilt before a single fact had been established. Only this time, the outcome would be different. This time, there was a recording. This time, there was a federal filing. This time, the complaint would not be dismissed. The story found its way to the press the way these things do, through sources, through department leaks, through the specific gravity that attaches to a recording when enough people know it exists. Within 2 weeks of the incident, a local news outlet ran a report. The report included the recording's existence, Rowell's name, and the detail that the men he had threatened were active FBI agents. By the end of that week, it had gone national. The recording itself was not released in full. Federal operational security precluded that, but the portions that were made available were enough. Rowell's remarks played on cable news segments, were quoted in editorials, circulated through social media in the specific, relentless way that audio evidence circulates when it says plainly what people have long argued exists. Public pressure arrived at the police department in waves, community organizations, civil rights attorneys, elected officials calling for statements, demanding timelines, requesting the full scope of the internal investigation. The department, already moved faster. Rowell's termination was finalized within 3 weeks of his administrative leave. His appeals cited procedural irregularities and an accelerated timeline, but the appeals board had the recording, the personnel file, and the full complaint history. The denials were unanimous. He turned in his badge on a Tuesday morning and left the precinct through a side entrance. 3 of the 5 implicated officers were reassigned to administrative roles pending further review. 2 were placed on leave. The precinct captain submitted a letter of retirement that was described, in internal communications, as voluntary. The FBI filed a federal lawsuit against Rowell and the city 10 days after his termination. The filing was meticulous. Watson and Volker had ensured that. It cited the 4th and 14th Amendment violations. It detailed Rowell's complaint history, the department's failure to act on documented patterns, and the specific harm caused by his interference with an active federal investigation. It sought financial damages and, critically, structural reforms. Watson read the filed complaint in his office the evening it was submitted. He read it slowly, the way he read things that mattered. Then he set it down and looked out the window at the city going about its ordinary life, the particular, ordinary life of a place that contained, somewhere within it, both the park bench and the precinct and the grocery store sidewalk where a 24-year-old had filed a complaint that went nowhere. The complaint would not go nowhere this time. The lawsuit settled in 11 months. The number was $950,000. It was not the largest civil rights settlement the city had seen, but it was the one that came with conditions, and it was the conditions, more than the dollar amount, that the attorneys on both sides understood to be the actual outcome. The settlement agreement ran to 41 pages. Mandatory bias training, department-wide annually, conducted by certified external organizations with no institutional ties to the police union. A civilian oversight board with genuine investigative authority, not an advisory panel, not a review committee, but a board empowered to examine complaints, compel document production, and issue findings that required a formal departmental response. Probable cause documentation protocols that required officers to articulate, in writing, the specific facts that justified any stop before a search or arrest could proceed. Quarterly audits of body camera footage, conducted by an independent office, with results reported publicly. The reforms were not unprecedented. Versions of them existed in other departments across the country. What was different here was that they were legally binding, attached to a consent agreement that the city could not quietly abandon when public attention moved elsewhere, and that they had arrived not through legislative advocacy or community organizing alone, but through a recording made in a public park on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. The 5 officers whose records had surfaced during the investigation moved through the process in different directions. 2 were terminated following their own disciplinary hearings, proceedings that unfolded with less media attention than Rowell's but with the same documentary weight. Complaint histories, stop logs, patterns that had been visible for years to anyone who looked with intention. A 3rd resigned during his review period. The remaining 2 were reassigned to administrative roles pending the outcome of ongoing investigations that, by the time the lawsuit settled, had not yet concluded. The precinct itself became a subject of study, not in the sense of scandal, but in the formal, institutional sense of a department that had generated a case study. The recording of the park confrontation was incorporated into federal law enforcement training materials within the year, used to illustrate how bias operates in real time, how rights get dismissed in the field, and why complaint systems that treat documentation as bureaucracy rather than data will always fail to see the patterns they are supposed to prevent. Officers in training programs in 14 states heard Watson and Volker's names without knowing the full shape of the story. They heard the recording. They discussed it in rooms very similar to the conference room where Harding had first played it, same fluorescent lights, same long tables, same effort to separate feeling from function. Whether the discussions changed anything in the individuals who sat in those rooms was harder to measure. What was measurable was that the department's complaint dismissal rate dropped in the 2 years following the reforms. That civilian stop logs showed a documented reduction in stops lacking articulated probable cause. That the Oversight Board, in its first 18 months of operation, reviewed 47 complaints and referred 11 for formal disciplinary action, a referral rate that was, by any comparison to the previous decade's numbers, a different order of magnitude. Watson and Volker completed the operation 4 months after the park incident. The network they had spent 6 months building toward came apart over the course of a coordinated, multi-agency operation executed across 3 cities on the same morning. The arrests were clean. The evidence was comprehensive. The federal charges were filed within 48 hours, and the prosecutions that followed over the next 2 years resulted in convictions across the board. They received commendations at a ceremony that was attended by colleagues and supervisors but not by cameras. Watson accepted the acknowledgement with the composure he brought to most things, receiving it fully, holding it for a moment, then setting it aside in the practical way of someone who already knows what comes next. In the years following, both agents became involved in advocacy work that existed alongside their operational responsibilities. Watson testified twice before congressional subcommittees examining interagency accountability and the structural relationship between federal civil rights enforcement and local policing. Volker contributed to a working group developing standardized protocols for what agencies should do when their personnel encountered local law enforcement interference in the field. The protocols were eventually adopted as guidance, not binding, but adopted widely enough to matter. Rowell did not find work in law enforcement again. His name was attached to the case in every public record and every news archive that had covered it, and those records were the first thing that appeared when prospective employers in law enforcement or private security ran background searches. The appeals had been denied. The termination was on file. The settlement was public record. He worked, in the 5 years following his departure from the force, in retail, a position that asked nothing of him except presence and compliance, the same qualities he had failed to extend to 2 men on a park bench. Whether he understood, in any meaningful way, what he had done, not merely to his own career, but to the constitutional order he had sworn to uphold, to the federal operation he had nearly destroyed, to the decades-long pattern of harm his conduct had represented, was not recorded anywhere. The legal system had no mechanism for that particular measurement. It could document action and inaction, harm and remedy, cost and settlement. What it could not compel was comprehension. 5 years after the afternoon in Riverside Park, the Oversight Board was still in operation. The annual bias training continued. The body camera audits produced quarterly public reports that were read, in detail, by a small and committed group of community members who had attended the first Oversight Board meeting and had not stopped attending since. The complaint referral rate had stabilized at a level that was, by every historical comparison, substantially higher than it had been before. Watson, now a supervisory agent himself, occasionally drove past Riverside Park on routes that took him to the field office. He did not stop. He did not slow down in any way that would be perceptible to someone watching from outside. But he was aware of it: the bench, the grass, the ordinary afternoon that had turned into something else entirely, in the way that places become permanent once something real has happened in them. He understood, with the clarity that comes from having been both the ignored complaint and the irrefutable recording, that the work of accountability was not a single verdict or a single settlement. It was a sustained and unglamorous insistence on documentation, on pattern recognition, on the refusal to let systems treat their own failures as isolated incidents. It was the work of people who understood that justice, at the institutional level, does not arrive as revelation. It arrives as method. The park bench sat where it had always sat, in the partial shade of the oaks, ordinary and unannounced. The recording still existed. Time-stamped, archived, retrievable. The evidence, as it always does, endured.